I'm excited to get into today. We'll finish off the prophecy since we didn't finish that last week. Got a little distracted. So we'll finish off the prophecy that Jesus gives here, and then we're going to talk about calling. And not calling in the terms of salvation, but calling in the terms of walking with God. And that is one of my favorite topics because I think that I think that oftentimes we're either not taught that, we don't realize that. I don't know what happens. But I think a lot of times somebody presented the gospel to us, whether we grew up with it, we went to church, we found a little Bible tract, whatever it was. But somebody explained to us in some manner that through the blood of Jesus, forgiveness for all time for sin has occurred, right? And through his resurrection, that power was demonstrated. And then they asked us, do you want to receive that forgiveness? And we said, yes, I need that forgiveness for those who have. And then we received it, and we were forgiven. And we probably even, many of us may have noticed, some people do, some people don't. Like, man, my life seems lighter, it seems easier in these things. But then what happens? Time. Time goes by, and we don't realize that now part of Christianity isn't trying to achieve to get, but it's walking with God, and that he has a call for me, that he has individual giftings for me, and that it's not, my life isn't about just me trying to live my life, and then Jesus kind of interjects now and again, but that's not true life, but it's that in actuality that he has a pathway for me, and that in that pathway it is the most fulfilling, the most joyful, the most peaceful pathway that there can be. And we don't necessarily always know that, and so we just kind of end up like bobbing around in the ocean as Christians, kind of feeling lost, wondering like, where do I go from here? We're like, what happens now? How do I, I read about life and light and all these different kind of allegorical ideas or metaphorical ideas in the Bible, but I don't experience those things. And this is kind of where we kind of begin to get into that with the disciples. So I think that's exciting stuff. We're going to start off with the prophecy. So in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 12, we'll reread what we looked at last week, and we'll talk a bit about the prophecy. When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. From that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. So we'll look at the map again. Last year, if you weren't here last week, we did a map because I am a real pastor sometimes. And so we have Jerusalem, right? And then you have Nazareth, which we just mentioned, might sound familiar because that's where Jesus was raised, right? You have Bethlehem where he was born, Nazareth where he was raised, and then it talks about him being in Capernaum. So the prophecy that we read about here is that, well, I should say first before the prophecy, is that what happens is here is Bethany, and just real briefly, you might notice that Bethany is a circle, but it's not filled in. That's because nobody actually knows where Bethany across the river, as it's called in the Bible, actually is. This is where a lot of really smart people that study it way more than we ever will have kind of come to the conclusion it's most likely location. Not something we need to be dogmatic about, not something we need to worry about. But the point is this, Jesus kind of goes from here, and then he begins to go into this area. They go to Cana of Galilee, which is where you have the marriage. Remember his first miracle, where he turns water into wine. And that's what we looked at last week, was kind of in John 1, the reality is, and we don't necessarily always see these things, is that in Matthew chapter 4:11, the devil leaves him. And in Matthew chapter 4, verse 12, when he heard that John had been put in prison, that's about a year. It's just shy of a year's worth of time. So again, in our Bible, you just read like blip, blip, and you feel like, oh, like on the next day. But it's not the next day. Meanwhile, in the meantime, what's happened is what we covered in John 1 last week, that he's going around and doing things, doing miracles, working these type of things. So he ends up kind of heading out from Bethany with some of the disciples. They go to Nazareth, they go to Cana, and then they go to Capernaum. The reason I want to bring this back up, so the prophecy is about Naphtali and Zebulun, which is this area right here, okay? So what happened is, in Joshua, when the children of Israel go in to take the land, there's a lottery, and they have, it's called a lottery, it was by lot, but it wasn't necessarily a lottery, it was what God said was going to happen, but he said, this is your lot. So each tribe got to inherit a certain area. right? Except for, Dan, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They actually decide to stay over down here before they go over to Jericho, but they agree to go fight for the rest of Israel until it's done, and then they come back. So, but having said that, that's the area that those two tribes inherited. So in about 738, 734 BC, right? So just almost, 50 years since now to now, the Assyrians, they come in and they invade Israel. This is not the first invaders they've had. It's not the last invaders they're going to have. It's a kind of a common occurrence. So if you were to go back and read, and it actually should be encouraging to us, if you were to go back and read the Old Testament, because sometimes we kind of get this view, and it gets kind of taught to us that like somehow, and this is not an anti-Semitic rant, go Israel. They are God's people. He is not done with them, and the last 7 years of Earth's history will be God working in his people again. So please don't think this is anti-Semitic in any way. But if you look at the history of Israel, they're just like us. They're crazy naughty. They really don't walk with God that often. If you look at what happened, if you look at the idolatry, you look at their interaction, they are constantly going back to old idols. It was not as if they were all just these good, Orthodox, practicing Jews holding steadfast in Egypt, and then they came out and they're like, finally we can worship the Lord our God. It's not that even remotely. In fact, Ezekiel tells us when they came out of Egypt, they were given to the Egyptian gods. They were all about the Egyptian gods. They had a heritage of Judaism for sure, just like the United States has a heritage of Christianity, but they were not in any way, we're speaking generally, not individuals, pursuing God as a nation. Does that make sense? So then they come out of that and they begin to give themselves to other localized gods. So briefly, starting with the Tower of Babel, you have kind of this whole spread, and this idea is born of localized gods. Because for the most part, we don't really have localized gods anymore, right? If I travel up to Ocean Park, they're going to be like, hey, we're all about Ashtoreth. And then like you come down to Seaview and they're like, we're all about Moloch. That kind of all went away when the Greeks came through and smashed everyone. Because the average idea about the localized god was, like, take the Amorites. You guys familiar with the Amorites? The Amorites started from a small settlement, and that settlement grew and grew and grew and became massive, became like a country. And so when they got to a certain point, when the city got to be thousands, they kind of got together and they were like, okay, whatever God lives in this area, he's super powerful. And that's why we're doing so well, right? Which, again, this is common human thought, isn't it? How many times have we been doing something we shouldn't do? We go, well, it's going pretty good. This must be what's good. Only for it to come crashing down, right? So they go, hey, our local God, he's like super strong. And so they name their city out of their language, Amur. They name it Amur. So thus they're named the Amorites. Their city grows, their city grows, their city grows. A few hundred years later, this people, which is odd because no secular scholar can identify who they are. They're just noted by the Syrians and by the Amorites in their little wheels that they have as the sea people. But we have no idea who they are. But the sea people come through and absolutely smash the Amorites and destroy them. Even though the Bible says there's a people that came from the sea and came out and absolutely smashed the Amorites, the secular scholar has no idea who they were. It's ridiculous how they try to twist history. But so what happens is, eventually these localized gods, they get smashed by the Greeks, and so they're not really a thing for us, because people realize, like, wow, these Greek people, their gods are just powerful everywhere, because they destroyed everyone who had a localized god. So that kind of falls out of being in vogue, as it were. But in this case, you have all these localized gods. Israel goes into the area, and God tells them, do not adopt those gods. Right? So there's a parallel, though, for us, right? As Christians, we're not to adopt the gods of the world. We're not to adopt money and clout and power and these things as the things that we want to serve to try to get things back from. But the point is this. Israel is, just like us, continually battling with idolatry. They're continually seeing. Because the thing that makes a thing powerful or to us worth serving is that we see or we think we see other people that serve it and they get good things, right? Money's a perfect example. We see people with money, and again, everybody's going to be on a different scale there because who has money compared to you, compared to someone else, it's going to be different. But if we just go if we say we see the 1% and we think, oh, those people have no problems. But in any honest interview of somebody who has incredible money, they will tell you that it solves nothing. It can be comfortable for a while. And realistically, most of us in this room probably have, I don't know, about 20 years ago, they released a statistic that if you make more than $40,000 a year, you make more than 92% of the world. So there you go. So for many of us, we're doing okay, all right? And so we can begin to believe that having money is security. Money is security. Don't raise your hand, raise your mental hand. How many of us believe that? Probably most of us, if we're going to be, or we've wrestled with it. If the bank account is full, I feel at ease. If the bank account is not full, I don't feel at ease. Even though we can turn to 15 different verses where God says, I will always give you what you need. There will never be a time in your life where you will not have what you need. Not what you want, but what you need. And so I saw a great quote the other day that said, we are a very anxious people for someone who've never been let down by God. That's legit. That's legit. But so the idea is this. Israel is just caught up in idolatry. So God allows the Assyrians to come and invade them at 738 BC. And they come in and the Assyrians absolutely smash that area of Naphtali and of Zebulun. And they take prisoners, they take slaves, a thing that was very normal for a conquering nation. It's not necessarily, there's no good in it, so please don't think I'm saying there's something good in it, but it was very normal, whether it be Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrians, or it would be the Hittites, or any people group. It was super normal and just for a little more context, it's important, some of these people groups are not that big, and I think in our mind, we always think of, the Battle of Helm's Deep, where there's 5 trillion things fighting 5 trillion things. A lot of these battles, you'll notice in the Old Testament, the numbers get less and less and less and less and less because people are dying. They die in these battles, and the cities get smaller and smaller, and you have plague, and you have the fact that they're just trying to get enough calories during the day. That's their life goal, right? So the battles get smaller and smaller. So some of these skirmishes that they're having is a few hundred people, which doesn't minimize the violence, but don't think of every skirmish as somehow that 5 million people got carried off. I'm sure it was terrible for the few thousand, but it was just to try to give us some scale. Anyway, so what happens a lot of times, they would drag people off from, for example, in Israel, they drag them to Assyria, and then they would take Assyrians forcibly, the king would, he would take Assyrians and then move them to Israel. And that was to accomplish assimilation. Because if you're a monarch, killing everyone lessens your resources, right? So it all comes from self-preservation. I'm not saying these are good guys, but the whole point was, if I can merge societies, I can get more. I can have more slaves, I can have more land, I can have more resources, I can have more riches. So that's their main motivation. So what happens is Syria takes a bunch of people out of there and also deposits some people too. And so in the text in Isaiah 9, which this is a quote from, the idea is that they cry out, they turn to God. And this is the human experience. It's not the good human experience, but it's for many of us, it's been our Christian life. And I don't say that in a condemning way, where we've kind of decided, I am a Christian, or at least I believe in Jesus, and I believe in the forgiveness of Jesus, but I'm not really keen on walking with Jesus, so I'm kind of do my thing, and then maybe say a blessing over my food, and then I think that'll work out for me. And then what happens is we do our thing, and we get crushed doing our thing. And we'll expand on that a little bit later. Not because God is crushing us, not because he's looking for people that disobey him and he wants to stomp them, but because the reality is that he is light and life, and we turn from him, we have to try to adopt something else for fulfillment, for satisfaction, for understanding, for all those things. So I think we have to get away from this idea that God is some sort of that everything that occurs in my life negative is punitive. It's not true. But really to the idea that a lot of times I bring these things upon me.